Well, thank you so much for that. It is really great to see you. We know the last 2.5 years have been super hard, and so for you to take time to come to convention and support us, it really means the world to us. And what we want to do in return is we want to make this a fantastic week for you. We're going to work really, really hard to do that. Now, my speech today is about a single prediction that I have about you and your team and your company. But before I make that prediction, I need to tell you a little bit about myself. I know you all know me pretty well, but let me just tell you a couple things. First, to state the obvious, I am getting old. I mean, I'm getting old. It's a reality. In June, I turned 65, and I don't say that with any degree of sadness at all. I am super grateful to be able to see our 3 kids grow up as adults, and obviously I'm beyond grateful to have a couple grandkids, and I'm thankful for all the experiences that we've had, good and bad. But there are some downsides to getting old. One of them is that time goes very fast. You know, I started to notice this in my 30s and 40s, and so many of you probably have as well, but the longer you live, the faster the time goes by. I mean, it really feels like just last month that we were in Washington for the annual meeting that was a year ago. And when I think back to 12 years ago, when I was introduced in Long Beach, I mean, that just seems like almost yesterday. This phenomena of time going faster and faster is a universal phenomenon. They talk about it in all cultures. And so I asked our crack research team, I said, look, I want you to get on the internet and study the great philosophers, Socrates or Plato or Aristotle, and see if you can find a quote that sums this up. And so here's the quote they came up with. Okay, no Socrates, anonymous, life is like a roll of toilet paper. The closer you get to the end, the faster it goes. It's actually pretty accurate. I'm also slower than I used to be. And I have like a daily chronicle of this because I used to be a runner, and now I am a pathetic jogger. You do not want to see it. I get hurt all the time. You know, sometimes it's running and sometimes it's just sleeping in the wrong position. You know, I can get injured. But I think by far the hardest thing to accept on a superficial level is what happens to our faces and our heads and all of that. You know, most men lose their hair, some women do. We all get wrinkly and gray and just kind of older looking. And I think a lot of us want to kind of keep that same look that we had when we had our photo taken as seniors in high school. We kind of look in the mirror, sort of still see that person. It really turns out that the harder you try to maintain that, sometimes the worse it can get. So here's a guy that has not yet quite admitted that he's losing his hair. Now, we actually thought we had a cure to baldness in the 1990s. Those of you that are, you know, my age or maybe even a little younger will remember Ron Popeil. He invented this magic hair in a can, this magic hair, and you just spray it on your bald head, and supposedly it would grow hair. I mean, if you think I'm making this up, I am not. Here is Ron Popeil applying this. Super shocking, this did not work. Turns out that if it rains or if you sweat at all, it goes away. And what reminded me of that was here more recently. Poor Rudy Giuliani. And you know, we all know those people that have a really good picture of themselves when they were younger, and they just keep using it and using it and using it, like on their Facebook page and all that. Turns out I'm one of those people. So here I am in April of 2006. I was 48 years old, running for lieutenant governor. This is with makeup and perfect lighting and a professional photographer. This is as good as I could look in April of 2006. And you would think, what, we'll use that for a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 or 5. No, we used it when I was governor. We used it when I came to AHCA. And in May of 2020, our public affairs team got me booked on the Chris Wallace show, big deal, Sunday show, Sunday talk show. They needed a photo, Fox did, for the promo. Here it is. And I mean, I show up and the producer's like, who the hell are you? We thought we were getting this guy. And, you know, proof that this did not look like me. Here's the real me. A lot less hair, a lot gray. And apparently, as I've gotten older, I just leave my mouth open like all the time. But there are some good things to getting old. And one of them is just the sheer number of life experiences that you have. I have lived through 11 recessions, 8 of them as an adult. I've seen interest rates and inflation at 20%, and now I've seen negative interest rates and negative inflation. I've seen the market get cut in half multiple times. I remember very clearly the afternoon when the market dropped 25%. I've seen the large companies in our space succeed and then fail, and then succeed and then fail again. I've heard all the predictions about how we wouldn't make it, and then we survive, and then we struggle, and we survive. And I'm not one of these older folks who thinks that suddenly I know everything, because frankly, one of the things I've learned is how often I'm wrong, and if anything, I've developed hopefully a little more humility. But I do see some things clearer than I used to. And one thing that I am sure about and that I see very clearly is my prediction for you. And that is that you, your team, and your company are going to survive this pandemic. You are going to make it. And I'm going to spend this rest of the speech telling you why I think that's the case. And then I'm going to tell you what I think you have to do in order for that prediction to occur. I think you're going to make it for a couple of reasons. First, we have an unspoken commitment and agreement with the government that these services will continue. Now, there is a downside to the government paying for our service, and that is that while I think it will always provide us enough funds to keep going, it will never provide us so much money that we will be a sector that has a large margin. In normal times, pre-pandemic, normal times, the average provider on the skilled nursing side had a 2% margin. Now, we had people that did better than that. The top performers, and I'll be talking about them in just a second, that might have had a 4 or a 5 or a 6% margin, but the average margin was 2%. Folks that weren't doing well at the bottom were sometimes at break even or below, but the government provided us enough money to keep going. What happened during the pandemic is that the margin band has shifted dramatically south. It shifted south about 6%. So all of a sudden, the top performers are at best breaking even or maybe losing a little bit of money. The average performers are losing 4%, and some people are doing worse than that. If the government had allowed this ban to last in 2020, 2021, and 2022, very few of us would still be in this room. We would have gone broke. But the government didn't do that. It provided us tens of billions of dollars, both at the federal and the state level. Again, not enough that we're suddenly having a bunch of money, but enough to keep our doors open. And I believe that the government will continue to provide those funds. Now, you might say, Mark, they're not going to do it forever. We're going to have to recover. And you're right. They won't make these extraordinary payments forever. We will have to recover, but that gets to my second point, and that is that recovery is possible. On both the assisted living side and the skilled nursing side, we continue to be about 5% below in occupancy where we started. But what we now have learned in the last year is that 30% of the sector is at or above its pre-pandemic census. The naysayers that were out there that said people will never come back to facilities, the sector will never survive, were simply wrong. Our services, both in AL and skilled nursing, are critically needed. More people would need those services as the boomers age, and we already have buildings that are in recovery. The second thing that we know from looking at the PBJ data is that agency use is not inherent in our system. 1/3 of our providers are currently not using agency at all. And so what I believe will happen is that we will continue very slowly and very painstakingly recover. We will continue to get the funds that we need from the federal and state government, and you are going to make it. Now, it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be free. You're going to have to do 3 things in my mind in order for this recovery to occur. The first is that you can't quit. It would be very tempting after fighting this for 2.5 years just to throw up your hands and say no more. I love this quote from Winston Churchill, and Stacy says this all the time when I get down. She says, if you're going through hell, you just have to keep going. We are at the 20-mile wall, the 20-mile mark of a 26-mile marathon, and we just have to keep going. Reverend Martin Luther King put it in a slightly different way when he said, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. So number one, We just got to keep going. Number two, we all have to commit to becoming top performers. As I've traveled around the country for the last 12 years and gotten to know providers really well, both in AL and skilled, I am often asked, Mark, how is it that these companies that are doing well? Why are they above a 2%? Why are they great in all these clinical areas? What is the secret sauce? I have seen in our sector, I have seen in every sector of the economy, and this is the clearest thing out there, is that it is all about leadership. These companies and buildings that are doing great have great leaders who are deeply committed to mission. Developing a mission statement is not a just check the box exercise. They are completely committed to mission, moving that mission all throughout their organization, living it, making decisions based upon the mission. They are completely committed to employee engagement and satisfaction. In fact, many of them tell me that in their organization, patients, residents come second because employees come first. They measure everything on the quality side, on the clinical side, and on the business side. They set goals and they hold themselves and their team accountable to the goals. If the folks are the wrong people on the bus, they throw them off until they get the right people on the bus to make it happen. It is all about leadership, and it has succeeded time after time after time in our sector. Christopher Christensen was asked on a conference call, the founder and former CEO of Ensign, about 3 years ago, how is it that Ensign continues to do well when the rest of the sector is really struggling? And Christopher said, I think it's so great, he said, you know, we are a nursing home company. We do take care of older people, but what we really are is we are really a leadership company. It is about leadership and culture and accountability and setting goals and making it happen. And then finally, we have to fight. You know, one of the great things that happened during the pandemic is that we stuck together. We didn't lose members, we gained members. We're bigger and stronger than we've ever been, and we turned that membership into action. Time after time, we have asked you to generate emails and letters to the CDC, to CMS, to the White House, and we've done something 3 times that almost never happens, which is that we've gotten policies reversed. It's really, really tough to do that in DC. And we're going to be calling upon you to do it one more time as we face the minimum staffing challenge. So you've got to continue to be active, not just in your buildings, but with the associations and continuing to fight for the policy that will keep us all going. So I'm going to close with a quote that I used to use a lot when I first started, but haven't been able to use for the last couple of years because I haven't known for sure if it still was accurate, if it still applied to our circumstance. And so I don't think I've given this closing at National Convention, but I've given it some of the state associations. And if you say, oh, I've heard him say this before, just humor me, okay? I'm old and just go with it. So it's a quote from Winston Churchill. And you know, I think he was, you know, one of the greatest leaders in history. He held the Western world together during World War II, but he did have his detractors. And one of his detractors was Lady Astor, who was the first female member of Parliament. And they were having tea in a castle in Scotland one day, and Lady Astor poured him some tea, and she said, Sir Winston, if I was your wife, I would be tempted to put poison in your tea. And Winston Churchill didn't pause. He looked at her and he said, Lady Astor, if you were my wife, I would be tempted to drink it. Thank you. That's not the quote, okay? I just like that quote. The quote is, he was exercising all these powers that it wasn't clear that he had. He might have been overstepping his authority. And he was asked by the media if he was worried about how history would treat him. And he said, I'm not worried about how history will treat me because I intend to write it. I intend to write it. And that's where I think we're at right now. I think that we now control our future. And honestly, I wasn't sure of that for the last couple of years. There were things that were spinning so far out of control with the pandemic that I was concerned that even top performers, people that were super committed to what they were doing and that were making all of the right decisions, I wasn't sure that they were going to make it. We're beyond that now. We're at a point in recovery that I am completely convinced that if you don't quit, if you commit to either staying or becoming a top performer, and if we stay united and fight, We're going to get through this thing. And I'm counting on you to make that prediction come true. In the meantime, God bless you and have a great week here in Nashville.